Saturdays, Lauren Delaney. Lauren, where are you? Wave your hand. He's going to talk about railroads next week. We have the Odd Fellows and the cemeteries, and Roger Nichols on the last of the Saturdays program on obsolete currency. But the kickoff today is Susan Buce, and Susan's, of course, no stranger to the historic community here. She's been working on this for many years and did a wonderful website that kept us all going before all the groups were able to put their own together. That's still online, I think. You can find a lot of historic information there. If you check on history in the Dow, it will come up. Susan's been working at the Discovery Center how many years now?
About 5.
5 years, yes. And just moved into a new job and a new title, which is?
I am the museum registrar.
Museum registrar. So, welcome the museum registrar. We had family history and regional history, and Sandy's going to remind me that you'd like to have everybody sign in the book, and you have a drawing for a prize.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
I thought you came up to remind me to make that announcement.
Right, and we have 4 door prizes, 1 for each week, and each one has one of our videos in it, and also a sweet treat in the bottom. Okay. I'm going to take the guest book downstairs for the downstairs people to sign. If you haven't signed it at the end, please do so. Thank you. And everybody has a chair, right? Okay.
And the drawing will be immediately after the program. There will be some time for question and answer. So let's have a big hand for Susan Buce.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. I will try to speak loudly. I'm an old deaf person, so I like it when the speaker speaks up. All right, I'm Susan Buce. As Carl said, I'm, after 5 years doing marketing out at the Columbia Gorge Discovery Center Museum, I'm now the museum registrar, and I get to play with the history and the artifacts. If you have never been there, please come visit, because it's the official interpretive center for the Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area. Now, I apologize up front because I'm an amateur winging it. I try to be accurate with a subject I'm not well educated in, and I know it's boring to listen to family history if it's not your family, but bear with me because much of it's relevant to our topic. So I'd like to acknowledge the fact that I'm drawing heavily from the writings and memories of my aunt, Margaret June Buce Hurth, who turned 95 in June of 2017. I spoke to her in August about her memories of her father's years as caretaker for the Columbia Gorge Beacons. She complained that she was old and that her memories weren't what they used to be, but I reminded her that she was sharp as a tack, and the longer we talked, the more the memories came to the surface and the more that she was able to recall. Some of those memories she recorded years ago in an autobiography called Now and Then, and the others came to the surface while we were talking. I am extremely grateful I took the time to talk to her last summer about this, because Junie passed away November 21st, 2017, at the age of 95. So my memories of her are very fond, and you can see there's a picture of my dad and her when they were little kids, so that was a big part of our memories. All right, I also would like to thank Doug Cole, who is a retired Delta Airlines pilot. I first began researching this topic when I discovered that I had been asked to speak about the beacons to a group of women pilots as part of an FAA safety training seminar, and whereas I knew the family history, I didn't know the air flight history, and Doug came to my rescue, so I was very grateful for his help on that. So let us begin. All right, before the Ice Age between 14 and 17 million years ago, the Earth erupted in lava floods of basalt. Now bear with me because geology is very important when you talk about flying the Columbia Gorge. Molten rock covered thousands of square miles, and the flood basalts were as fluid as molasses and spewed toxic gases. Rather than coming out from the mouth of a volcano, these lavas poured out of fissures, cracks in the Earth's crust. They were tens of meters wide and miles long and between 1 and nearly 3 miles thick. They oozed out at an estimated 5 to 6 miles per hour, and throughout the Columbia Gorge, these are known as the Columbia River basalt. There were over 300 lava flood basalts in the Columbia region during millions of years. Now, there was, after the flood basalts were done, we had the northern hemisphere went into an ice age. About 1,500 years ago, a massive lake formed in the Missoula, Montana region, hemmed in by an enormous ice dam, and when that ice wall first broke, it released what Rick Thompson, who is the author of a book called Gigaflood, said was the largest of the Lake Missoula Ice Age floods. The floodwaters carried with it, in that first initial breaking of the ice dam, 540 cubic miles of water, 50 cubic miles of debris, and 40 cubic miles of ice, and it tore through the western area at 65 miles an hour. When you think about what happened to the Columbia Gorge at the time, those ice age floods scoured the sediment off of the hillsides in the Columbia Gorge and rushed through, and as they erupted out of the Portland area, you notice that those floodwaters came this direction and left behind prominent peaks like Horsethief Butte, Beacon Rock, and Rocky Butte. Now, Rocky Butte is an extinct volcanic cinder cone. It is part of the Boring Lava Field, a group of over 30 cinder cones in Oregon and Washington. And you can see that right at the top of Rocky Butte is a rotating beacon that was visible at night for miles. I believe they probably have a cell phone tower up there right now, but back in the day when the beacons were in place, Rocky Butte was an important part of that whole chain. This site is adjacent to Interstate 205. Now, let's jump forward in time a little bit to a little bit of history you may have heard about. On December 17, 1903, Orville and Wilbur Wright flew the first powered aircraft at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. The Wright brothers had invented the first successful airplane, and this year will be the 115th anniversary of that. Really momentous leap forward in technology. The first transcontinental flight began September 17, 1911, in Sheep's Head, New York. You can see the picture there of the beginning flight as it was taking off from New York and headed for the Pacific Ocean. It took 3 months to accomplish that task, ending on the beach in Pasadena, California on December 10th. The pilot was Cal Perry Rogers. He had just 90 minutes of instruction from Orville Wright before he took off on his first solo flyer. He flew a Vin Fizz flyer, which today hangs in the Smithsonian Museum. His actual air time during those 3 months was just under 84 hours. He underwent 75 stops and 16 crashes along the way. Now, right during that period of time when he was making that first transcontinental flight, the U.S. Post Office Department's first official experiment at flying airmail took place on September 23, 1911. Pilot Earl L. Ovington flew 640 letters and 1,280 postcards from Garden City, which is Long Island, New York, to the nearby post office in Mineola, which is located less than 6 miles away. Ovington took off in his own American-made monoplane, the Dragonfly, at 5:26 p.m. and dropped the bag of mail from an altitude of 500 feet. Now, stop and think about that. The Vista House at Crown Point is about 773 feet, so that was quite a ways up. Unfortunately, the bag broke when it hit the ground, but all of the mail was eventually recovered and distributed through more conventional means. Now, this stamp right here was issued by the U.S. Post Office in 1912. They printed this 20-cent stamp in their parcel post series showing a flying machine entitled Airplane Carrying Mail. The mail bag behind the pilot right there is labeled number 1. First regularly scheduled airmail service began in the U.S. on May 15, 1918. The post office oversaw the service but had no reservoir of experienced pilots. They used the U.S. Army Air Corps pilots to fly the mail for the first 3 months. On August 12th of 1918, the post office took over full control of the service using their own pilots. Airmail contracts were the core of the financial support and stimulus of commercial aviation in the United States. Meanwhile, here's some family history for you. My grandfather, Jack McKinley Buce Sr., entered the military as a young man of 17. And he enlisted in the U.S. Navy February 14, 1914, and served as a seaman electrician, 3rd class during World War I. He was discharged on January 19, 1918, after serving 3 11/12 years. That's on his discharge papers. World War I was still going on, so he turned right around and enlisted in the U.S. Army on March 11, 1918, listing on his application his knowledge of any vocation as an electrician. Now, my Aunt June told us, while in the Army, he met 17-year-old Ethel Brining in Cincinnati, where she lived. Ethel and some of her girlfriends got on a streetcar to go to where they would board the River Queen, a boat that would take them to an amusement park. A group of soldiers, including Jack, were on the streetcar, and they had seats and the girls did not. So after a whispered conference, the girls started singing the Star-Spangled Banner, and when the soldiers stood up in respect to the national anthem, the girls took their seats. That was a pretty clever icebreaker. To make a long story short, they all went on the excursion boat together. Ethel and Jack carried on their courtship by mail. Now, Jack was serving as a chauffeur with the U.S. Army Aviation Corps, the forerunner of the U.S. Air Force. It's why he was in Cincinnati at the time. You can imagine how exciting that was, being surrounded by pilots and people on the cutting edge of the new technology of aviation. This launched a lifetime interest in aircraft for him. Now, World War I ended on November 11, 1918. Jack was discharged from the Army the next year on June 13, 1919, from Taylor Field, Alabama. His discharge stated the reason of his services being no longer required. Now, on September 30th, 1919, 10 days after Ethel turned 18, they were married at Taylor Airfield. Taylor Airfield was originally constructed as a primary training ground of the Army Air Service in 1917 near Montgomery, Alabama. It was one of 32 Air Service training camps for fighter pilots established after the U.S. entry into World War I in April of 1917. More than 200 Curtiss JN-4s and de Havilland DH-2 aircraft were used at the field during this period. A total of 139 pilots completed the 8-week training course, and some went on to serve in France during World War I. You might recognize this stamp. It's known as the inverted Jenny, picturing one of those Curtiss JN-4 planes my grandfather spent time around. The Wham Museum in Hood River has an old Jenny on exhibit. This 24-cent stamp with the image of a Curtiss JN-4 plane was America's first airmail stamp, issued May 10, 1918. A single inverted Jenny stamp sold in May of 2015 for $1,175,000. Now, the post office inaugurated regular airmail service on May 15, 1918, flying between Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and New York City. The Jenny 38262, this photo shows the actual plane that is pictured on that stamp, was chosen to launch the inaugural 3-day airmail run. When the U.S. Postal Service opened up airmail routes during the early 1920s, many people saw it as a frivolous novelty. Paul Henderson, the second assistant U.S. Postmaster General, said in 1922, airmail is an impractical sort of fad and has no place in the serious job of postal transportation. Planes could travel faster than trains, but airplanes could only operate safely during the daytime. In 1922, letters sent by airmail would have to leapfrog the country, traveling by air during the day, but take the train at night. A letter moving at its absolute fastest might take about 83 hours to get from New York to San Francisco. Nearly 1 in 10 airmail pilots died during those early days, and emergency landings were common. There had to be a safer way. Now, the transcontinental air route was something that was opened up as they began making their plans for stretching the transfer of mail through a safe corridor. In May of 1926, Congress passed the Air Commerce Act, which gave the federal government responsibility and funding for fostering air commerce, establishing new airways, improving aids to navigation, and making and enforcing flight safety rules. Management of the route system moved to the new Aeronautics branch of the Department of Commerce, which was established in August. They encouraged private enterprise to enter the field. By the early part of 1926, contract airmail carriers flew most of the airmail. Now in 1930, President Herbert Hoover's Postmaster General, Walter Brown, citing inefficient and expensive airmail delivery, requested legislation from Congress granting him authority to change postal policy. The Airmail Act, passed on April 29, 1930, gave Brown the authority to extend or consolidate airmail routes as best as he interpreted such needs in the public interest. He held a series of clandestine meetings, later dubbed the Spoils Conference, which led to 3 companies being awarded the bulk of the nation's airmail routes. It didn't take long for their competitors to complain. They had not only been forced out, they hadn't even been invited to the table to bid. A scandal erupted. I know it shocks you that the government would have scandal. Brown was accused of awarding the contracts not based on bid, but on whether the contractor was favorable to the Hoover administration. After Herbert Hoover's landslide defeat in 1932, newly elected President Roosevelt decided to suspend the contracts altogether. He canceled the contracts and directed the Army Air Corps to take over the service. Now, unfortunately for the pilots of the Army Air Corps, their planes had little in common with private mail planes, and the pilots were not properly trained for the demands of night flight, let alone the bad winter weather. Airmail pilot routes were long and hard and demanding. They'd become accustomed to flying the mail in all kinds of horrible weather as demanded by postal officials. 3 Army Air Corps pilots died just during training for the airmail flights. Winter storms challenged the pilots and aircraft beyond their capabilities. By March 10, 1934, the Army Air Corps pilot mail operation had endured 66 crashes or forced landings, and 12 Army pilots had died while flying the mail. World War I aviation legend and then current head of Eastern Air Transport, who was one of the countries that had their contract canceled by Roosevelt, Eddie Rickenbacker publicly referred to the service as legalized murder. Now, if you've ever flown in an airplane, you know the landscape looks a lot different from up above than it does when you're down on the ground. Pilots were no different, and they often used railroads and roads as landmarks to be able to tell where they were and to follow along on their route. Flying conditions were difficult since the only navigation devices available to most pilots at the time were magnetic compasses. Fatal accidents were routine. Pilots flew 200 to 500 feet above ground, and low visibility and night landings were made using bonfires on the fields as lighting. Enter the Highway of Light, a system of inland lighthouses These airmail beacons spanned the country. By 1926, the Transcontinental Airway System beacons were brought under the authority of the Bureau of Lighthouses. The beacons were spaced out every 10 to 15 miles from New York to San Francisco. Upon completion of the system in 1933, there were about 1,550 light beacons stretching across 18,000 miles, guiding the pilots along the way. Once the new lighted airway was in place, mailed the letters that used to take 83 hours to get from coast to coast took just 33 hours to get from New York to San Francisco. Now, each airmail beacon consisted of a revolving motor-driven light which sat at the top of a 60-foot tower with two course light sides on each side of the platform. In clear weather, they could be seen for 40 miles. Beacons in areas with flat landscapes sat on giant concrete arrows painted bright yellow to point the way, allowing airmail pilots to navigate without depending on trains, bonfires, or daylight. Many of these arrows remain today, some of which are still visible from Google satellite if you take the time to look it over. Not every beacon had a concrete directional arrow. I asked my Aunt June about that, and she said, "Are you kidding? Most of the places here in the Gorge barely had room for the beacons, much less a concrete arrow." Now, an airway beacon has two distinct light characteristics. A revolving, you can see the revolving beacon with a narrow white light beam and a set of fixed colored course lights. The rotating beacon featured a 24-inch parabolic mirror and a 110-volt, 1 kilowatt lamp spinning at 6 RPM, creating a quick 1/10 of a second flash every 10 seconds. The beacons along the Columbia River route were part of the Portland to Spokane route. They lined the gorge with the red beacons on the south in Oregon and the green beacons to the north of the Columbia River in Washington. This followed Navy tradition for navigational buoys. Red lights also denoted an airway beacon between landing fields, while green denoted a beacon adjacent to or on a landing field. They made a sort of runway strip, whoops, down the gorge. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Down the gorge that you could sight visually one beacon to the next. Now, the other thing that the beacons did was say, "Look out, there's a mountain here, you don't want to hit it." So, all right, the flashing lights from the beacons were actually Morse code. Each side light blinked a Morse code letter to identify the beacon to the pilot. Each beacon had its own code, so pilots knew which beacon they were sighting and how far they were from the airport. The course lights turned on for 0.5 seconds for a dot, 1.5 seconds for a dash, with a 0.5 second interval between each dot or dash. A pause of 1 second separated each letter. Each beacon flashed the red or green course lights with a Morse code ID of one of 10 letters, W, U, V, H, R, K, D, V, G, or M. The letters represented the digits of 1 through 10, with W being 1 and M being 10. To help remember the letters in their sequence, pilots memorized the following phrase: "When overtaking very hard routes, keep direction by good methods." The beacons were depicted on navigation air charts along with their number and Morse code. Beacon Rock was 3A, and so that code was DIT, DIT, DA, or U, and Hood River was 6A, and that code was DA, DIT, DA, or K. You get the picture. I'm not sure I would have at the time, but now Doug Cole explained it to me. He said the ground station transmitted several beams or legs in a prescribed direction. The A leg transmitted the Morse code letter, DIT, DA, and the end leg transmitted the Morse letter, DA, DIT. The pilot detected this by hearing the sound transmitted into his headphones. If the A sounded stronger than the N, he knew he was off to one side, of course, the desired course, and the opposite if the N were heard stronger. If directly on the correct leg, a steady tone would be heard, as DA, DIT, and DIT, DA would all sound as one steady tone. The airway beacons would be used in VFR or visual conditions, and the radio range in IFR or instrumental conditions. Now, after the military, Jack and Ethel Buce moved around a bit as he took one job after another. In 1920, my father, Jack McKinley Buce Jr., known to the family and friends as Mick, was born in Pettit, Oklahoma. The little Buce family moved to Oregon in 1921, first to Portland, then to Bingen, Washington. Margaret June was born in 1922 in Bingen. They then moved to Trout Lake, where Walter, known as Hank, was born, followed by Ruth. I knew June was 5 when they lived in Trout Lake because my grandfather carved her name on a birch tree with a rendering of an owl and the date of 6/12/27. A photo of this carving ended up in the archives of the U.S. Forest Service, hanging on the wall at the ranger station in Trout Lake, and was used on a brochure for the Western Forestry Center in Beaverton. Aunt June told me my dad constructed the first power plant providing the first electricity for the Trout Lake Valley. He got it running, but it was not taking in enough money, so he had to declare bankruptcy. After the power plant was a thing of the past, Dad got a job in Maxville, Montana, building another power plant. In 1928, while living in Montana, another boy, Thomas Allen, joined the family. Tom grew up to become an engineer with Boeing, so you can see that there's a bit of a tie with the aviation crowd in my family. June recalled, while living in Montana, my father had a friend whose name was Paul Bertelsen. He was from Denmark and worked on the railroad as a signal repairman. In order to contribute to the family economy, my mom took him in as a boarder. His hobby was flying an airplane, a de Havilland Gypsy Moth biplane, and since this was about 1929, it was a two-seater with an open cockpit and a passenger seat. One day, Dad and Mick and I were out at the airport, and he offered to take us up for a flight. It was all right with my dad, so we clambered aboard and sat down. I don't recall a seatbelt. I was very small at the time and unable to see out over the cowl, but I had a fine time and could see out very well as we flew over Butte. The view through the cracks in the floor was excellent. Well, the following January, Jack got a job as a boss electrician at the Granite Mountain Copper Mine at Butte, Montana, where the family enjoyed the perks of living in a modern town with the very first flush toilet. The family added another son, William Bill Buce, in September 1930, which brought the head count up to 6 children as the family entered into the years of the Great Depression. June said in the winter of 1930, Dad applied for and got a job with the Civil Service to maintain the beacons of the Columbia Gorge. He had to report to headquarters in Portland, Oregon. For him to have landed a government job with the Civil Aeronautics Administration during the Great Depression was a real blessing. He was paid $50 a month. His job title was mechanician. He had to buy his own uniform, and he looked sharp in it like today's uniforms worn by the U.S. Forest Service. What did a mechanician do? An article titled Air Lighthouses, published in Flying and Popular Aviation magazine in 1941, described the duties. Few persons know how those men work. They do not know the story of hardship and danger which airways mechanicians encounter in all kinds of weather to keep those lights in operation. All have civil service rating. Their job is one which takes the combined talents of a high-wire artist, gasoline engine mechanic, electrician, bookkeeper, and mountain climber. One mechanician is in charge of a section of lighted airways in its intermediate fields. He must visit beacons and emergency fields on a regular schedule. He must overhaul gasoline engine generators, repair them, and adjust and replace equipment and parts. He must test and locate trouble and grounds and electrical installations and renew wiring. He must hire and deal with caretakers of emergency fields, make requisitions for supplies, and keep detailed records. He must, in other words, be a little of everything rolled into one. Now, Jack's route was going through the Columbia Gorge, and at the time, the government wanted him to live a little bit more in the center of these routes, so their next move was to Cascade Logs. While we lived, Aunt June told me, there, preparations for the building of Bonneville Dam were begun. Dad was excited about the coming of the dam and all the electricity it would produce. He drew pictures to explain to us how the fish ladders would work. He kept close watch on the progress of the dam site. Now, on May 6, 1934, Junie told us, we moved to Mosher's to be more even centrally located, as by then Dad's route extended to Pasco, Washington. Before the move, Dad found a house, this time one that was for sale. It was the old Mosher house built for Jefferson Mosher, the town's founder. Built in 1904, at that time it wasn't so old, only 30 years, but we loved it and still do. The house was the largest one we ever lived in. They bought the house from Mrs. Mosher, who had suffered a series of catastrophic losses. The death of her son and her husband were quickly followed by the death of her mother. I talked to Jane Mosher several years ago. She told me her mother had been so emotionally distraught that she left nearly everything behind, and Jane, who was only about 5 years old at the time, was only allowed to take one doll with her when they moved. My Aunt June told me that when they moved in, at first the long back room was locked, and we kids used to peer through the keyhole to see what was in there, as Mrs. Mosher had some things stored there. They couldn't quite figure out why the door had been locked and the kids weren't allowed to play with the stuff, but eventually Mrs. Mosher collected her belongings. Now, how did the beacons get built? The Sunday Oregonian published an article January 31st, 1932, about the construction of the Columbia Gorge beacons and declared that it had been a great feat of engineering. William C. Schmidt was the Portland contractor who engineered the construction of the Columbia Gorge beacons. Stringing that line of beacons up the gorge to Pasco was one of his toughest jobs, and he did it so well that the government hired him to put in other links in the southwest. Planting those heavy steel towers on top of rocky hills so solidly that the gales would not blow them away was not all beer and skittles, as they say. 4 sites caused most of the difficulty: Beacon Rock, the high bank above Wanna Lake, Sand Island in the Columbia opposite Bridevale, and Rocky Butte, in that order of general toughness. Because they were unable to blast out holes in the highest point of the rock where the beacon was to be located, the towers often had to be fastened by long rods and holes bored by the workmen. By dividing his men into 4 crews, Mr. Schmidt was able to install the 20 beacons and towers in 35 days ahead of his contract time. The first crew set up the towers, the second put in the concrete work, the third the powerhouses and shed, and the last crew the electrical work. Popular Science magazine published an article in September of 1931 that reported night pilots flying between Portland, Oregon and Pasco, Washington now pass through a lighted tunnel 50 miles long. Because of the danger of running into neighboring mountains in a fog, they follow the course of the Columbia River. The high walls of the river gorge form the sides of the tunnel, and low-hanging fog often completes it with a roof. On the 50-mile stretch between Cape Horn, Washington and Lisle, Washington, the special lights have now been installed. Green beacons flash along the Washington side, red beacons flash on the Oregon side. The aviator, skimming along under the 250-foot ceiling, steers between the rows of lights, which are made necessary by the fact that the heavy fog entirely blots out the regular revolving beacons. Winds keep the bottom of the gorge free of fog. Pilots tell me that last sentence is nonsense. All right, the Portland to Spokane Airmail route. I apologize for laying the map on its side, but given the shape of the gorge, it was the only way to fit it all on one slide. Now, the gorge segment from Portland to Pasco is shown on the top part, and from Pasco to Spokane on the bottom part of the map there. There are 20 sites on the airway, roughly 1 every 10 to 15 miles, 7 emergency landing fields, 3 code beacons, 17 revolving beacons, 11 sites where power plants to furnish electricity were installed in the location, and 9 sites where power is brought in from commercial lines. The cost of construction was close to $30,000, and the cost of the equipment was $70,000. This map shows the airway map given to pilots in 1930. There's little on this map that was specific information that would be useful to pilots. The map is a nice rendition of the river and adjacent railroad lines. There's some topographical notation about the height of the ridges, but as for a chart for the beacons, not so much. It was of limited use to pilots. The 1931 map, John Little, who's assistant curator at the Museum of Flight in Seattle, tells me is hanging on display in their museum on the first floor of the Red Barn near the northwest corner in the Northwest Aviation section under the heading the Columbia Gorge. The beacons here are shown with a red star, green lights located on the north of the river, red lights on the south, and a revolving light beacon noted with a star with a hollow center. Now, the 1934 map shows the addition of the IF low frequency 4-course and ANN radio ranges, one near the Dalles on the east end and the Portland one actually located just off 4th Plain Road in Vancouver on the west end. The chart becomes more defined and includes the beacon code for the rotating light beacons. Doug Cole told me, I grew up in Vancouver almost across from the Portland airport. The Rocky Butte beacon shined directly into our living room, and on a dark night, the white flash would actually illuminate the room. In the 1930s, the Portland airport was located on Swan Island on the north side of the Willamette River. This photo by David Lewis is from 1948, and you can see that there's the beacon right there on top of Rocky Butte. As for Beacon Rock, that monolith is 848 feet high. It's the core of an ancient volcano whose sides were carved away by the Ice Age Lake Missoula floods. Lewis and Clark named it Beacon Rock, but the name was changed to Castle Rock. However, in 1916, the property was purchased and renamed Beacon Rock, and Beacon Rock it remains. My Aunt June told me there used to be a beacon on Rocky Butte, and Dad would take us along up there to service it. We also climbed Beacon Rock, not only to the top of the rock, but to the top of the tower on top of the rock. There I performed my cleaning duties, and I would use Bonamie to clean the lenses and the reflector. After I learned to do that so no powder or lint remained, I had a job for many years. For my cleaning duties, I used rags. Dad used to get great bales of rags from the government for this cleaning chore, and when he got a new bale, we used to scope it out for the rags. Sometimes there'd be usable things in there, and sometimes remnants of new material, which I would confiscate. Sometimes there was nothing of interest at all. As for the Bonamie promise to turn 4 dirty boys into angels, I don't think that worked in my family. Just my guess. All right, my Aunt June said, when I talked to her in August, how the heck they got that beacon to the top of Beacon Rock, I have no idea. The beacon itself wasn't very tall, maybe about 12 or 15 feet high. It didn't need to be because it was on top of Beacon Rock, which was plenty high enough. I was pleased to have shared the story with her about that before her passing. Thank you to Scott Cook, the author of Curious Gorge, for sharing the article with me. The Sunday Oregonian, published on January 31st, 1932, stated, Beacon Rock, roughly 40 miles from Portland, is the highest beacon above river level on the airway and is certainly the most conspicuous in the chain. Because they were unable to blast out holes in the high point of the rock where the beacon was to be located, the tower had to be fastened by long rods and holes bored by the workmen. Foundations for it were required to be strong to withstand the wind at that height. Now, not far from Crown Point, and we all know that Crown Point has clocked winds at over 100 miles an hour, so it had to be strong up there. In anchoring a heavy tower and a 1,000-pound lighting apparatus on the top of Beacon Rock under restrictions, the crews, directed by Mr. Schmidt, worked about the same as a man in a straitjacket trying to eat a piece of pie. The job was replete with danger. The hiking trail up Beacon Rock, if you've ever huffed and puffed your way up to the top of it, is steep. This picture shows the modern day trail, complete with wooden bridges and solid metal handrails. None of the handrails existed back in the 1920s. Well, the way that they transferred all of the materials up there, a ton or more of concrete and steel, it had to be packed up on the back of horses. Horses didn't take the high altitudes, and particularly the trail on Beacon Rock. so there were endless difficulties with the nags. One of the horses fell off a bridge on the way up and only escaped falling 200 feet straight down by workmen dragging her back up again. And at that point, she refused to go up the trail any farther. At the bridge, she halted and remained halted. For 4 nights and days, the nag lived on top of Beacon Rock, hungry and thirsty, until Mr. Schmidt decided that something must be done. On the last day of the job, 3 men pulled Jenny from the front and 3 pushed from behind, while one held a blindfold over her eyes, and they finally got her down. There was another beacon at Mitchell Point, and Aunt June told me that was a rough one to climb up to. There was just enough room for the beacon and not much else perched up there on that rocky slope. This is a picture of Doug Cole at the site of Weather Station Rock, which is over on the Stevenson side of the river. He told me my uncle, Ted Cole, had a cabin on the water about 3 miles east of Stevenson near Carson, Washington. When we started visiting in the early 1950s, there was a remnant of an airway beacon and a World War II weather station on that property. What I recall is a tall pole painted with red and white visibility stripes. It was still standing in the mid-1950s and eventually fell towards the river and decayed. Now, support eyes drilled into the rock are still visible at that location. There are foundation remains of a structure a bit north and lower down. A benchmark used by the Washington State Highway Department as their survey monument is located on that property. The Mosier Beacon's code was 6B, da-did-da. Now, this doesn't look much like a beacon in Mosier on that map, but it was just east of Mosier. I know precisely where this one was located because it was still active when I was a kid, and it's the only one I remember. I saw it many, many times on our way home to the Dalles, driving back from my grandmother's house in Mosier, blinking the little red light. You see that hill just as you round the big curve crossing the railroad tracks and begin pulling up the hill as you drive east from Mosier. The hill overlooks the Maredale Mansion Estates, now the Garnier Vineyard, which would be roughly in this area right here. The current owner of Maredale is Tom Garnier. He says his records show that Marky Mayer leased that land to the Department of Commerce and received $1 for rent. Tom suspects the lease period was for a year. It didn't say in his records. He also suspected, knowing that Marky Mayer, that he would have tried to wrangle a $10 tax credit for him. The current Columbia Gorge Regional Airport in Dallasport is in a slightly different location than the airfield was in the 1930s. Not only is it in a different location, it had a different name. The airport was listed on the map as North Dalles, and in May 1930, the airfield was dedicated as the Walter E. Case Field. Now, Chuck Covert, who is here, thank you, Chuck, for coming, operations manager at the airport, recently took me out to view the location of the old airport. It was on the south side of Dallasport Road, the river side of the road. While there's little evidence of the old airport hangar foundation, there's a few old cinder blocks there that you can see. It's likely the old runway is covered with housing on it. Now, I'd be interested in pinpointing the locations of the beacons right here in this area. And I know that there's one said to be on the old Fulton property. My Aunt June thought she remembered a story about the man that operated or owned the property where the beacon was located in the Dalles was a man by the name of Shorty, whom she thought she remembered had been murdered. Now, I'd like to know more about that story, but that's another mystery for another day. I'm afraid I don't know any more about that as it is. Now, there's a plaque just outside the front entrance to the Columbia Gorge Regional Airport building. Chuck tells me it used to stand outside the old hangar, and they had it moved to its current location. It reads, "In memory of Walter E. Case, Captain, U.S. Air Corps Reserve, presented to Walter E. Case Field by his friends and associates on the occasion of its dedication, May 30th, 1931. I found a letter for sale on the internet the other week showing the postal cancellation, which reads, right there, you can see it very faintly. Dedication, Walter, Walter E. Case Field. Sandy? Uh-oh, this is not my computer, so. Sandy?
Did you break my computer?
Well, I don't know. Is it, I didn't hook it up. Did the power go off? I don't know.
Is it plugged in?
I don't know.
Check the connection over by the podium.
Yeah, it's plugged in.
Okay. Well, anyhow, I found this letter on the internet, and the letter was addressed to Case's widow in Portland, and there's the signature of Mayor Fred Thompson and President of the Dallas Airport, which I couldn't quite read the handwriting, whether it was A.B. Stone, but I just found it about a week ago, and it's for sale for $15. So if anybody has got an emotional attachment to the local area aviation history,
So you
the
got,
value is low. I didn't plug it in, don't blame me.
evidently it's not plugged in, it's been working on the battery.
Oh.
Where's, oh, okay, you guys don't even have it plugged in.
I am not the
Now I know
hardware.
how long the battery lasts.
I am not the hardware. I can outlast the battery, then I'm like an energizing bunny. This gives me a chance to.
I
be
tell
okay.
people that, she's just,
All right, so, that letter,
okay, so Susan, can you plug it in, check?
oh, I would be happy to. Well, the rest of it will be a puppet show.
Okay.
I think we have to hit enter.
No, it's automatic in 4 seconds.
Oh, in 4 seconds. Okay, well, I'm impatient then.
The one thing Susan and I do best together is argue.
We've got that down to a fine home science right now.
Science, yes.
We're probably gonna have to start this talk all over again, aren't we?
Just because Mary Davis came in late, you're gonna start over again?
Mary Davis is on her own.
You hear that, Mary?
Okay, so, let's go back real quick. Whoops, that went too far back.
Go forward, backward.
Okay,
What is that TV show that says, I love it when a plan comes together?
18.
this is going the wrong direction.
Yeah.
I need to get back.
Is this going the wrong way?
Now you're going back, yeah.
That's where she wants to
Yes,
go.
we want that to
Continue.
happen. Keep doing what you were, no, go back.
No,
You
you were doing it.
were doing it right.
There
Okay.
you go.
Yay.
Okay. Very good.
This is not my strong suit, technology. All right, so here we are back at that letter. I just wanted to point out that there was one of those airmail stamps, the 5-cent one showing the beacon on that letter, so. All right. Now, here's the plaque, just, let's see, now I'm messed up. All right. This is the insignia, close-up of the insignia dedicated to Walter Case, showing the U.S. Airmail insignia. Now, what was the story about Walter Case? The article published in Portland recaps his death. Portland, Oregon, January 30th, 1931. Like many others before him, Walter E. Case, pilot, flew to his death. It was determined today with the finding of his plane and body inside wrecked on the base of Bluff Mountain, 34 miles northeast of Vancouver. Mail carried in the plane, one belonging to the Varney Airlines, was said to have been found intact. Difficulty was expected in removing the body and mail, it being necessary to swing 200 feet by ropes down a cliff. The plane had struck with such force that the engine was jammed back into the cockpit and the wings were crumpled. Case disappeared more than a week ago while flying mail on his regular route between Portland and Pasco. The weather conditions have been reported as heavy rain and fog, and another article published in Salem said that the party of rescuers, led by forest rangers, placed the canvas-covered and cinched body on a pack horse after trudging through waist-deep snow. Case crashed at 7:07 a.m. January 22nd, 3 minutes after his last radio message saying he was over Portland seeking to land. That article said that he crashed on Mount Baldy. Well, Mount Baldy is by Ellensburg, but there is, you can see on this map of the Gifford Pinchot Forest, there's Bluff Mountain and Little Baldy Mountain right in that area, so I suspect that that was where he crashed. But this, where he crashed, this plaque is a really nice tribute to a brave airmail pilot who lost his life performing a civic duty for people. Now, there was usually a little shed at the foot of the beacon that housed 2 Fairbanks Morse Company engines to power the beacons. A main one for power and a secondary one for backup. Now, my Aunt June was very specific that they were Fairbanks Morse engines. I've contacted the Fairbanks Morse engine historian. There's a historian for every little niche in history, and he's, now I've got him intrigued. He's researching the beacons back in his area, which is back in Illinois, but Junie told me while Dad did maintenance work on the engines, the boys would pull weeds from around the shed. If there was an airstrip, Nick would mow the grass. They would perform the maintenance tasks at one beacon and move on to the next. Jack took the children with him on many occasions as he traveled between Portland and Pasco to service the beacons. June told me for some of the beacons we would park the car on the highway and then pack all the supplies up a trail to the beacon. I'm sure we kids were a great help. Several of the beacons were located next to airfields. This is the Arlington airfield right here. June told me there was an airfield at the beacon site in Arlington that had to be mowed. One day, Dad decided to teach me how to drive while we were there. I got behind the wheel and gave it a go. I managed to hit the only gopher hole on the whole airstrip field, and it was a big one. That was the end of my lesson that day. Later, I gave driving another try in Mosier and promptly took out a pig fence. That was the end of my attempt at driving until after I was married. The beacon? That's not good. Okay, the beacon in Oregon was right by the highway, and that beacon terrified me. It was really tall, and I was scared to climb it. So you can kind of see the Umatilla Army Depot. Umatilla had a beacon as you're heading up the road to Pasco there. While driving from Umatilla, through Umatilla on the way to Pasco, Junie said that they used to see herds of wild horses. There was an airstrip at Pasco, and the government would provide Jack with a new car every few years due to his need to travel. So in May of 1937, he took the family with him to San Francisco to pick up a new car. By sheer chance, they were there the day when the Golden Gate Bridge opened, which was quite a celebration. The beacon from Anderson Point near Cascade Locks is now on display at the Western Antique Airplane and Automobile Museum, the WAM, in Hood River. They used a helicopter to move it there in 1982. If you haven't been to the WAM Museum lately, do yourself a favor and go. A new revolving beacon is being renovated inside the museum, and Director Judy Newman, who is here today, thank you, Judy, would love to hear from you if you have additional information on sites in the gorge where there were beacons. Due to the high speed of development in the fields of radio navigation and communication and aircraft that were much larger and faster, the airway light beacon had already served its purpose by the really beginning the 1940s, and by the mid-1960s, the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, moved to decommission the entire lighted airway beacon system. Today, only one airway beacon still operates in western Montana, a lone sentinel on the Continental Divide. Now, in October of 2017, Montana officials decided to decommission all but this one airway beacon. The beacon atop McDonald's Pass is now listed on the National Register of Historic Places and is readily visible from US Highway 12. Jack McKinley Buce Sr. died November 2nd, 1944, just as the need for the beacon system was winding down. His obituary read, Buce was an employee of the U.S. Aeronautic Bureau in charge of the airport beacons in this region. He was well known throughout the country and was a member of the Masonic Lodge and of the American Legion. 8 years after Jack's death, my grandmother Ethel remarried John Kerr. She lived in Mosier House until it was the late 1970s or the year of 1980, I forget which. My dad traveled to Mosier to see her every weekend. I would tell people I've mowed that lawn more times than I can count. He helped keep an eye on things. My earliest memories include driving home at night from Grandma's house, and as we headed home to the Dalles, we'd pass that red beacon winking on the hill above Mosier, and as a child that was really a comforting sight. The Mosier House is now owned and operated by Matthew Coroner, and after extensive repair and restoration has been operating as a bed and breakfast as well as a vacation rental for the past several years. Matthew tells me he still feels my grandfather's presence. I never knew my grandfather in person, but I appreciate this chance to get to know him a little better through my research for this talk, and thank you very much for allowing me to share this history with you. Now, I would like to remind you that I'm relatively ignorant when it comes to anything that was not in this talk. But we've got a couple of experts in the audience, so if you've got a question, I'd be happy to take it. But keep in mind, I'm an old deaf person, so.
Tell them about your handout, Dan.
I've got some handouts here on the table. Specifically, the website links for all of the resources I use for accumulating my information, and on the back of that, one of those resources has got a list of the Airmail beacons and the GPS locations of where they were at, and those GPS locations that appeared to me to be relevant to the Columbia Gorge and my talk today, I copied and are on back of that piece of paper. So if you feel like a little treasure hunt, get your GPS locator device and get out there and find those old beacon sites, because you can still find some of those foundational monuments.
Court come to order. So, the second of our Regional History Forum series. I understand there are some people that have never been to the courthouse here before, and I want to welcome you especially. This was the original 1859 courtroom, not the location. It used to be down where the City Hall is now. Building's been moved a number of times, which is shown to you on that poster board way in the back, on the back wall there. Jail cell downstairs, be sure you check that out, and everybody is invited to come on downstairs afterwards for cookies and continue the conversation. So we have 2 more programs after this. Next week I was just talking to Craig Hector, who's the sexton at the Oddfellows Cemetery. We'll talk about the Oddfellows organization and the cemeteries and that whole operation that created these cemeteries in many, many towns around the country. That should be very interesting. And then the last week will be Roger Nichols talking about obscure currency. The coins, the bills. He has everything from I think it's a half penny, or is it a quarter penny, little tiny thing, to a $100,000 bill. He will show us all that stuff, and if you have coins or currency that you'd like him to take a look at, he's willing to do that. Limit of 3 coins or bills per person, and he'll give you some idea of what it might be worth, and he'll take a look at that. Well, so has everybody put their drawing tickets in the little box over there? You have drawings each week, and that will happen right after. We also have a sock over there. Sandy, you want to start passing that around? We don't charge for this series, but we're certainly open to donations, and we appreciate all of that because that helps keep the courthouse going. The other thing, of course, is memberships, and on the desk downstairs there are forms for memberships, and when you're a member you get notices of all the programs coming up, and we don't charge you admission during the tourist season when we're open several days a week. Okay, here's some more tickets. Another one coming there. Yep, got some more coming. Oh, yeah, right, we have a guest book, and we encourage people to sign that. When you're applying for grants and those kinds of things, they all want to know how many people are coming through your doors, and we like to keep track of that. Well, we have a treat in store for us today. Lauren Delaney, gosh, how many years have we known Lauren Delaney? He was used to teach math with my wife to the kids out at Salino Village. He was a teacher at Gorge Community College. Several other things before that, but his claim to fame today is that he grew up right here in the area, and his childhood in Wishram, and knows that North Side Railroad very well. He's going to tell us all about it. He's been doing some interesting research, especially at the Discovery Center, and has uncovered some wonderful pictures to show us. So, big welcome to Lauren Delaney.